A person could be forgiven for feeling a bit insulted by a screencast on how to read a journal article. After all, you know how to read, and there are probably good reasons to assume that this would be no different from reading anything else. The truth is, there is a meta-literacy skill at play in finding and reading academic journal articles. Most scholars are actually sifting through literature to find the most relevant and meaningful sources. We don't want to read everything. We want to read the most relevant sources. Moreover, we don't want to read the same article 30 times just because we couldn't remember what the whole thing was about. Perhaps a better way to describe this video is not how to read a journal article, but rather how to read the right articles once. We're looking at scholarship in the social sciences, but the same principles can be implemented in academic work in other areas as well. It's just that the patterns will be different. In this example, let's imagine that we're investigating developmental math for students in community colleges. I'm using an article by Fong et al. To serve as an example of a quantitative study. This is an empirical source. There are, however, other forms we might encounter as well, such as literature reviews, theoretical frameworks, or even annotated bibliographies. Keep in mind that we're strategizing. How much of this article do I need to read? If, when we finished these strategies, we decide we do need to read the article, we'll ask a different set of questions to guide our annotation. You've surely heard the old adage, don't judge a book by its cover. But when we're drilling through a large number of potential sources, it's a good idea to judge a work of scholarship by its abstract. In most instances, the abstract is written by the authors, so it should be a valuable representation of the work as a whole. If, after reading the abstract, I decide that this article is not directly related to my research topic, I'll likely move along to the next. That's not to say the article is bad, I just recognize it's not what I want at the moment. The abstract exists for one ethical purpose. It is there to help the reader determine whether one needs to read the work. One should never, under any circumstances, cite or rely upon the abstract as a means of understanding the author's work. Students who cite or paraphrase an abstract are analogous to undergrads who write a paper on Beowulf having only read the Cliff Notes. It's obvious, and it's a clear marker that the student is not serious. If, after I've read the abstract, the article looks like something I might use, I tend to try to get to the research question as quickly as I can, which often exists either at the end of the introduction or at the end of the literature review. The introduction will give me a good idea of whether we're looking into the same specific topic. My next step in culling through sources is to read the conclusion. Where do the authors end up in this study? Often I will discover that I thought that the study was headed in one direction, only to learn, having read the entire article, that they were actually interested in a different facet of my topic. I'm not reading the conclusion to see whether I agree with the findings or not, just to ensure that the research questions were related to my own inquiry. One tip is to consider doing these steps while you're looking for literature to read, and then reading the literature in a different setting. I find it helpful to have hunting sessions where I look for relevant literature, and reading sessions where I move slowly through the works. Once I have 20 articles I really want to read, I can stop hunting for a while and start reading. Students typically get very frustrated with annotated bibliographies, and insofar as we sometimes treat these as performances of learning, I get it. But I try very hard never to read an article that I don't annotate. Let me see if I can give some reasons why. The Fong article is about 19 pages long. If I can find a way to read this article once, I'll be a much happier camper than if I have to read those same pages over and over again because I can't remember what's unique about this source from the other 80 sources I'm reading through. Fong et al. Actually do a lot of research in developmental math, so I could easily be challenged to distinguish this article from among other articles by the same authors. An annotation at its best is not performative. Rather, it is a utility. In summarizing the article, I like to ask the following questions. What is the thesis or the research question of the source? What is the sample of subjects? What was the N, or how was the sample selected? What methodology was employed in the study? What were the general findings? And what was the answer to the research question? What were the implications of the findings, according to the authors? In analyzing the article, I find it valuable to ask, why are the research questions relevant? Did the authors use a theoretical framework? Was it appropriate for the study? Were there benefits or limitations to this method? Do the findings answer the research questions directly, or do they answer them indirectly? Finally, I think it's helpful to document, why in the world did I want to remember this article anyway? If someone else had the same research question as me, why should they read this article? What specific strengths does this article have for my own research question? Is the method something I want to consider? Or is there an instrument I wish to come back to? Or do the findings represent an alternative conclusion from other sources? Or is this a landmark piece of research? I really like using Zotero to manage my sources. I actually keep my annotations in Zotero under the Notes section for each source. Notice my annotation of Fong et al. I've actually cut and pasted the information from the article I wanted to highlight. I could have just highlighted the information in the article, but now I don't have to go back and find my highlights in the source. If I were turning this annotation in for a course assignment, I'd reformat these annotations into my own words, but here I've just extracted the key elements in their words. I put quotation marks around the pasted elements of the text and page numbers, so I'll remember that these are the author's own words. By strategically narrowing the number of articles I choose to read, and then extracting the relevant information while I'm reading, I can efficiently get through a great deal of research. Moreover, if I manage my annotations carefully, I can even increase the odds that I won't have to read the same article several times to remember the most important information.